The snowfield looked clean enough to belong to a postcard. Flat whites stretching to a line of dark pines. The valley cupped by rock on both sides like hands holding a breath. The sun hung low and pale, more a bright stain than warmth, and everything under it seemed sharper than it should. Every footprint stayed crisp. Every ridge line cut a hard edge against the sky. That was the problem. A patrol moved single file at first, then widened to a staggered line as the terrain opened. They weren't careless. They were just honest about the ground. There was no real cover out there. No boulders tall enough to hide behind. No folds deep enough to swallow a man standing. Only shallow drifts and knee-high snow grass poking through ice. Their boots squeaked with each step, a soft complaint that traveled too far in the cold. The team leader, Staff Sergeant Darnell, raised a fist and the line stopped like a pulled chain. He scanned the ridges with binoculars, the glass fogging at the edges. Beside him, a radio operator twisted the knob and listened to the faint hiss of the net. Their mission was simple on paper. Confirm the condition of a dormant sensor site near the pass, check for tampering, and report back before the weather turned. A daylight walk-in, daylight walk-out. Air cover on call in a later window, if needed. Clean. Darnell lowered the binoculars and made a small, slicing gesture. Move. They did, stepping into the center of the valley. The first burst of fire ripped the quiet apart so violently it felt like the air itself had been punched. Snow sprayed up in short fountains around their boots. The sound of a machine gun came from high ground to the left, steady, disciplined, not the panicked chatter of someone firing blind. It was a hammer, and it struck in measured beats. Down! Darnell shouted, voice shredded by the wind. Men hit the snow hard, faces buried in powder, rifles shoved forward. The valley that had seemed harmless became a sheet of glass under bullets. One man tried to crawl backward, and an explosion kicked up a white geyser behind him. An RPG hitting the snow with a dull thump that still rattled teeth. Another burst raked the center of the line. The geometry of it registered even through adrenaline. Fire from the left ridge, then a beat later from the right, then something lower and farther ahead. A third angle pushing them into a box. Not random. A trap. Contact left. Hi, someone yelled. Right ridge. 2 o'clock, another voice. RPG front. Darnell tried to pull the radios into order. Breaker, breaker. Falcon, this is, he stopped, pressed the push to talk again, harder this time as if force could make signal appear. Falcon, this is. Only static answered. Not even a usual weak reply, just a thick, ugly hiss. The radio operator switched to an alternate channel and got the same. He tried the handset directly. Nothing. He looked up, eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from systems failing. Jammed, he said, voice small. They're jamming us. It hit the unit like a second burst. No comms meant no quick air cover, no outside coordination, no simple extraction call. Just them and the valley. A forward scout, Corporal Ruiz, lifted his head to get eyes on the left ridge. For a heartbeat, his face was visible above the snow, jaw clenched, breath steaming. Then he snapped backward as if yanked by a rope. Blood steamed against white snow, dark, immediate, shocking in the clean light. He made a sound that wasn't a scream, more a wet cough of surprise, and his rifle slipped from his hands. Ruiz is down, someone shouted. Darnell crawled toward him, tried to keep low. Bullets stitched the snow between them, kicking up powder that hung in the air like smoke. Ruiz's eyes were open. He was trying to speak. His gloved hand clawed at his chest where the round had punched through. Time compressed. The valley narrowed into a tunnel of noise. Darnell felt the old, cold calculus start. Where can we move? Who can shoot back? How long before the enemy closes? Who bleeds out first? He raised his rifle toward the left ridge and fired short control bursts at a dark shape behind a rock. His rounds hit snow and stone, sparks flicking like tiny stars. The enemy gun didn't pause. It kept hammering, forcing heads down, pinning them flat. Another RPG hit farther back, showering the rear element in snow chunks the size of fists. A man screamed. Someone else shouted for a medic. Darnell tried the radio again anyway, because leaders always do even when it's hopeless. The static hissed, and swallowed his words. It was like screaming into a blizzard. The enemy was good. You could feel it in the rhythm. They were walking their fire, tightening the box. Each time a man tried to lift his head, rounds snapped over him. Each time someone crawled, the gun shifted and cut off that line. They were being herded toward a patch of slightly deeper snow in the center, an area that looked like cover but wasn't, a false depression that would trap them. Darnell realized it in flashes. He shouted over the gunfire, "Don't bunch up. Spread. Stay low." But movement was a gamble. The open valley offered no mercy. Then something happened that didn't fit. A gunner on the left ridge, one of the shapes feeding the machine gun, jerked as if struck by an invisible fist. His head snapped sideways. The machine gun stuttered, then fell silent. For a half-second, the valley rang with the echo of the last burst fading away. Darnell froze. So did the men around him. Silence in a firefight was unnatural. It made the ears ring. No one saw a muzzle flash. No one heard the crack of a rifle. Only a faint thump that could have been wind against rock. Before Darnell could process it, another enemy figure collapsed on the right ridge. That one spun, staggered, then fell backward out of view as if the slope had swallowed him. The right side fire faltered. It didn't stop, but it lost its confident rhythm, turning ragged for a moment. The unit stared up at the ridges, blinking snow out of their eyes. "Did you?" someone began. "Who took someone else?" A third voice, almost a whisper, said "Ghost." The word was absurd, and yet it stuck because nothing else explained it. In the same daylight that made every ridge line visible, an unseen shooter was cutting down enemies with angles that didn't make sense. The enemy hesitated. Their fire paused, then resumed with less certainty. They shifted position, searching for the source. Darnell felt the pressure loosen for the first time since contact. Not enough to stand, but enough to breathe. He used it. "Move Ruiz," he barked. "Drag him now." Two men crawled forward, grabbed Ruiz by his vest straps, and pulled him backward inch by inch. Bullets snapped overhead, but fewer found the snow near them. The box still existed, but one side had been dented. Darnell scanned the ridges again, trying to see what he couldn't. Nothing. Just snow, rock, and the occasional dark patch of pine. Whoever had fired had done so without announcing themselves. No radio call, no shouted warning, no visible movement. They survived the first wave only because the enemy, so disciplined a minute ago, was now uncertain. And uncertainty was the only thing that could break a trap. But it raised questions that tasted like ice in the mouth. Who was out there? How did they find those angles? Why had the ambush been laid so clean, with jamming and 3 elevations, as if the enemy had rehearsed the valley like a stage? And what had killed the radios so completely in the first place? Hours earlier, those questions didn't exist. The world had been smaller, warm coffee in a metal cup, a map spread across a folding table, breath fogging a briefing room. The outpost sat on the edge of a frozen forest, its perimeter half buried in drifts. Inside, the air smelled like oil, sweat, and old heater dust. A generator hummed somewhere outside, steady as a heartbeat. Darnell stood at the front with a grease pencil and a map pinned to plywood. Around him, the squad leaned in, helmets under arms, gloves tucked in belts. The mission was routine enough that some of them wore that dangerous expression, confidence mixed with boredom. "We go in at first light," Darnell said, tapping the map. "Sensor site is here, near the pass. Last telemetry died a week ago. Could be weather damage. Could be," he paused, letting the implication hang, "someone got curious." A lieutenant from Intel, fresh face, clean uniform, cleared his throat. "We've had increased chatter across the ridgeline. They've been probing. Nothing confirmed, but they may be testing response times. If they can get their hands on the sensor package, they can learn what we see, how fast we react. That's a propaganda win and a tactical win." A few men exchanged looks. One muttered, "So they're fishing." The lieutenant nodded. "Exactly. If they can film an ambush, even better." Darnell's jaw tightened. He'd seen what propaganda did. A camera could turn a small fight into a worldwide headline. A morale weapon sharper than bullets. "Air cover?" someone asked. "Window opens late morning," Darnell said. "Weather dependent." The room shifted, confidence relaxing. Late morning air cover meant a safety net, the kind that made people feel invincible. The door opened, and a gust of cold blew in with a figure that made the room hush without anyone meaning to. She was smaller than most of them, bundled in winter camo that swallowed her shape. She carried a long rifle case over one shoulder and a pack that looked heavier than it should for a frame. Her face was pale from cold, eyes steady, hair tucked tight under a cap. No swagger, no introduction that demanded space. The lieutenant glanced down at his notes, surprised. Who's this?" Darnell answered before she could. "Attachment, marksman support," came down from the ridge post. A few brows rose. One of the younger guys smirked as if he'd been handed a joke. She set her pack down with quiet care. When she opened the case, it wasn't a sleek modern rifle with rails and gadgets. It was older, bolt-action, worn finish, the kind of weapon that looked like it had been carried through more winters than the man in the room had lived. Someone couldn't help himself. "That thing from museum?" A couple chuckles. The sound wasn't cruel exactly, just thoughtless, the way boredom looks for something to bite. She didn't react. She checked the rifle like a ritual: bolt, chamber, scope mount, sling. Her movements were precise, almost gentle, like she was handling something alive. When she spoke, her voice was calm and low. "I can work with your plan," she said. "But that ridge line," she pointed with a gloved finger to a faint contour on the map, a place most eyes slid past. "That ridge matters. Wind cuts there. Sound carries odd. And if someone wants to box you in the valley, that's where they'll anchor it." The smirk faded from one face. Another man rolled his eyes anyway. "We're not walking into a boxing match." She looked at him, not offended, just measuring. Most people who walk into one don't know it until they're bleeding. Darnell felt something in that sentence, experience, not drama. He had learned to respect the quiet ones, because the loud ones often used volume to hide fear. The lieutenant tried to regain control. "We've got overwatch. We've got a window for air cover. Let's not overcomplicate." She didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to her rifle, as if the conversation was already settled, and the only thing worth doing was preparation. As the briefing ended, men filed out, pulling gloves back on, joking about frozen toes. She stayed behind, studying the map one more time. Darnell lingered too, watching her. "You been up there long?" he asked. She paused, then answered. "Long enough to learn what the snow hides." That was all. No name offered, no rank thrown like a badge. Darnell could have demanded details, but something told him she preferred invisibility. And maybe that was the point. A marksman didn't survive by being memorable. Outside, the wind cut sharp. The squad formed up. The men with newer rifles checked optics, slapped magazines into pouches, tugged straps tight. She checked nothing except the rifle and the snow. She looked at the horizon, at the way the light hit the ridges, at the shadows that would deepen later. One of the guys, Mason, leaned close to another and whispered, not as quietly as he thought, "They really think she's going to save us with Grandpa's rifle?" The other snorted. "Maybe she'll scare him with antique vibes." She heard. Darnell saw it in the tiny shift of her eyes. But she didn't turn, didn't correct them. She simply kept walking, letting their assumptions wrap around her like camouflage. As they moved into the valley hours later, those assumptions felt heavier. Confidence made men loud in their heads. It made them overlook things like half-filled tracks hidden by drift, like the way one ridge line seemed too clean, too empty, like the absence of birds. She noticed. She always noticed. When the first rounds hit the snow and the radios died, the squad's confidence shattered into action. She didn't freeze. She did what she'd already decided she would do the moment she'd seen that ridge on the map. While others fired back blindly, she pressed into the snow, eyes moving, mind mapping angles. She didn't fight the valley. She looked for the seams, the places the terrain tried to hide. A shallow ravine cut through the snowfield like a scar. It wasn't deep enough to stand in, but it was enough to crawl unseen if you accepted slow movement and freezing knees. She slid into it without ceremony, using the moment of confusion after those impossible shots, the moment she herself had created, to disappear. Darnell didn't even realize she was gone until he needed her and couldn't see her. The firefight resumed with new weight. The enemy, now suspicious, poured rounds into likely hiding spots. Mortars began to land, thumps that pushed air and snow outward in dull rings. The blasts weren't random. They were bracketing, walking closer like a hand closing around prey. Snow dust rose, turning the clean daylight into a shifting haze. Visibility collapsed in waves, clear for a second, then white-out cloud, then clear again. The worst kind of weather, unpredictable. Ammo ran low faster than anyone liked to admit. In cold, magazines felt heavier, fingers clumsier. Weapons heated under sustained fire, then cooled too fast when paused, metal squealing in protest. One rifle jammed. Another man tore at his bolt, cursing, eyes wide. Ruiz moaned behind them. A medic pressed gauze hard against his wound, hands red through gloves. The medic's voice was tight. He's losing too much. We need to move him. Move him where? The valley was still a kill box. Darnell tried the radio again and again, switching, adjusting, lifting the antenna higher, as if the air itself could be persuaded. The hiss remained. Jamming wasn't a blanket. It was a deliberate hand over their mouth. Then he saw it. Movement on the far ridge. Not just shooters. A maneuver element. Dark figures sliding down toward the valley's mouth, cutting off retreat. Another element on the opposite side, mirroring. The enemy wasn't content to pin them. They wanted them trapped. It was a hunter's patience, and it carried an intention beyond killing. A faint buzz threaded through the gunfire. Darnell looked up in time to see a small drone, dark speck against pale sky, hovering for a moment over the valley like an insect deciding where to bite. Then it slid away, disappearing behind a ridge. A chill unrelated to temperature moved through him. A drone meant eyes. Eyes meant the enemy could adjust fire, could direct mortars, could film. Film. The intel lieutenant's warning echoed. If they can film an ambush, even better. Darnell's mind snapped back to the sensor site. Maybe the valley wasn't the target. Maybe the unit was bait. Maybe the real objective was to force them into a predictable response, long enough to steal something. A voice cut through the chaos, calm, close, unexpected. Sergeant. He turned and saw her crouched low, her face dusted with snow, eyes steady. She moved like she belonged to the ground. No panic in her posture. The bolt-action rifle lay across her arms like it was part of her body. Permission to break off, she said. I can't fix this from here. Mason stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Break off where? It's open. She didn't look at him. There's a ravine. It leads to the cliff shadow. I can get to an angle that matters. Darnell's instinct flared. Splitting forces in an ambush was risky. Sending one person alone into enemy terrain bordered on insane. But then he remembered the two impossible shots. The silence. The sudden dent in the trap. Those had been her, hadn't they? He didn't have proof. He had worse, faith. What do you need? He asked. Time, she said. And don't chase me. If they see you move, they'll understand. A mortar landed close enough to shake teeth. Ruiz cried out a raw sound. Darnell looked at his bleeding man, his pinned squad, the encircling enemy. Go, he said. She nodded once and slipped away again, melting into the ravine like a shadow swallowed by snow. Darnell felt a strange fear then, not for himself, but for her. Because if she failed, they would die. And if she succeeded, she would do it alone, unseen, unthanked, and possibly never return. The ravine was narrow, its sides crusted hard. She pressed her body flat and crawled, using elbows and knees, letting the snow take the imprint of her shape. The cold burned through layers, but she ignored it. Pain was information, not an emergency. Above, bullets snapped. Occasionally, snow drifted down into the ravine from impacts, dusting her back. She timed her movement with gusts of wind, letting the valley's natural noise cover the scrape of gear. She kept her rifle close, muzzle taped against snow clogging. Every few meters she paused, listening. Sound in winter terrain did odd things. It carried far, then disappeared in dead zones. Wind could mask movement or betray it. She used it like a tool. The ravine led to the base of a cliff where the snow lay thinner, rocks showing through in dark ribs. Here, the valley's glare was broken by shadow, the kind that hid depth. She found what she'd expected, an old shepherd path cut into the rock, half buried and forgotten. It wasn't on any map. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of thing people missed because they looked for clean lines and modern routes. She followed it, moving fast now, body tucked close to stone. The cliff blocked enemy eyes. The snow here was hard-packed, less likely to betray her with crunch. Above, the ridgeline rose, jagged and unforgiving. She reached a notch, an outcropping that gave a view across the valley to the enemy's command node, a cluster of rocks where movement was too deliberate, too organized to be random shooters. Antenna mast. A man crouched over equipment, head bent. Another figure with binoculars scanning. This was the brain. She set up quickly, not wasting time on comfort. Prone position, pack under chest, rifle resting on a fold of cloth to deaden vibration. She checked her scope and felt her stomach tighten. The optics power indicator flickered weakly. Battery dying. She'd expected it. Cold drain batteries faster than anything. She'd carried a spare, but the spare had been used the day before during a long watch. She'd hoped the remaining charge would hold long enough. Hope was not a plan. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple backup, an old-school reticle insert she could align manually if the powered optic failed. It wasn't perfect. It would slow her, but slowing was better than blindness. She steadied her breathing, letting the world narrow to the shape of a man crouched over a box with wires. She watched the antenna sway slightly with the wind. The jammer. So that was the key. She waited for a gust, strong enough to cover the sound of a shot, to blur the echo. When it came, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle gave a muted thump, swallowed by wind. No sharp crack. No obvious signature. The man by the jammer jerked and collapsed sideways, hands flinging out, wires snapping loose. Down in the valley, she imagined radios waking like animals smelling air. She didn't linger. She cycled the bolts smoothly, chambering the next round, and shifted her aim. A dark shape on the opposite ridge. Another marksman, likely controlling the right side fire. His posture was too still, too patient. He was the kind that killed heads the moment they rose. She watched his routine, scan, pause, adjust. She learned his breath without knowing it. A second gust came. She fired. He slumped forward, rifle sliding from his grip. The right ridge would go quiet, or at least uncertain. Uncertainty was a wedge. She moved to the next target, an RPG team leader. Not the man holding the tube, the one pointing, the one deciding when to shoot. The force multiplier. She found him because he was shouting, arm chopping the air, confidence bleeding into motion. One round. He dropped mid-gesture. Below, enemy fire stuttered. You could almost feel their cohesion fray, the way a net tears when you cut the knots. But a competent enemy didn't stay confused for long. They adapted. She saw it in the sudden shift of their movement. Men breaking from cover, climbing toward her suspected angle. Not charging the valley, hunting the source. Climbers with rope, moving up the cliff face in pairs, using the same shadow path she'd used. And above the ridge, the drone returned, buzzing, searching, learning. She felt fear then. Not panic. Functioning fear. The kind that sharpened the senses, made time stretch. She had maybe minutes before climbers reached the notch. The drone could spot her if it hovered over the cliff. The enemy still had mortars. And her optic could die at any second. She needed a shot that didn't just kill a man. She needed one that broke the enemy's spine. She scanned the command node again. There, one figure stood taller, gesturing, face turned toward the valley, issuing orders. That was the field commander, the one knitting the ambush together. The wind eased. She couldn't wait for perfect gusts anymore. She adjusted for distance, for the slight drift she could feel on her cheek, and fired. The commander's body snapped backward. He hit the rocks and didn't move. For a heartbeat, everything below seemed to hold still, like the valley itself was listening. Then the enemy reacted, not with disciplined fire, but with frantic movement. Shooters shifted, looking for direction that wasn't coming. The mortars paused. The flanking elements hesitated, uncertain whether to continue closing or to pull back and find cover. In a valley, Darnell heard his radio pop with a burst of broken voices, sudden, overlapping, alive. He grabbed it, almost laughing with relief. Falcon! Falcon, this is static still threaded through, but there was signal now, fragmented and weak. He didn't need to talk yet. He needed to move. Now, he shouted. Bound back. Use the drift line. The squad reacted like a spring released. 2 men laid suppressing fire, short bursts at the ridgelines. Others dragged Ruiz, boots digging trenches. They moved in bounds, one element up, another covering, despite the chaos. Because they were trained, and training mattered when fear tried to take the steering wheel. Enemy fire still snapped, but it lacked the clean geometry from earlier. It was angry now, not planned. That difference saved lives. A mortar round landed wide, kicking snow far behind them. Another didn't come. The mortar lead, somewhere above, had gone silent. She took him out next. The mortar team was harder to see, tucked behind a crest. But she watched for the tell, a faint plume of snow dust with each tube adjustment, the subtle movement of men passing rounds. She found the leader's head when he leaned in to shout correction, and she fired. The tube never fired again. The drone buzzed closer, an insect with intent. She could feel it even before she saw it. She rolled slightly, shifting her profile, pressing her cheek into snow. She could shoot it if she hit it, yet shooting a drone often meant revealing position with motion, with follow-up sound. And the climbers were closer now. She heard it. The scrape of gear on rock, the faint clink of metal. She chose movement instead of pride. She slid back from a notch, staying low, pulling her rifle close. She moved along the shepherd path in a crouch, letting the cliff hide her. The drone hovered at the notch, searching, then drifted confused. It had lost her because she wasn't there anymore. Behind her, the climbers reached the notch and found only disturbed snow and a cold impression where a body had been. They shouted, anger carried in their voices. They were hunting a ghost that refused to stand still. Her optic flickered again. She ignored it, relying now on her backup alignment, on muscle memory, on the kind of practice done alone in quiet places. She relocated to a second hide she'd chosen hours earlier without telling anyone. A shallow depression behind a boulder that gave a view of the flanking element trying to cut off the valley's mouth. They were still moving, trying to complete the encirclement even as their center collapsed. Competent enemies didn't quit. They adjusted objective. If they couldn't kill the unit, they could still trap them long enough to steal the sensor package or film a chase. She watched them for seconds, deciding. Then she fired at their radio man, the one with the antenna on his pack, the one keeping them tied to the rest. He dropped, and the element slowed, heads turning. Confusion widened like a crack in ice. She didn't need to kill them all. She needed to slow them, to make them doubt, to make them feel watched from every angle. Fear was a weapon too. Down below, the squad reached the edge of the valley where shallow, terrain folds began. Trees offered cover at last. Darnell looked back over the snowfield and saw the enemy's fire diminishing, their movement less coordinated. He still didn't know how it had happened. He only knew they were alive. The extraction window was shrinking, weather shifting earlier than forecast, clouds thickening, light flattening. The radio operator finally caught a clearer signal and managed to push out a broken call. Unit in contact, jammed, casualties, requesting urgent extract at pre-planned landing zone. Minutes stretched. The enemy, realizing prey was escaping, tried one last push. Shots cracked from the ridges, wild now. Another RPG screamed in and exploded in the tree-line, snapping branches, showering needles. Men flinched, but kept moving, dragging Ruiz, supporting another wounded teammate whose leg bled through his pants. Darnell's throat burned from shouting. His mind kept replaying the impossible shots, silent death on the ridge, no flash, no visible shooter. He had a name for it now in his head, her. The quiet attachment with the old rifle. But where was she? Above, she heard the thump of rotors before she saw the aircraft. Low, pushing through thinning snow haze. A helicopter nosed into the valley edge like an animal cautious of a trap. Its door gunner scanned the ridges, weapon ready. The enemy fired at it, but without coordination their rounds were scattered. The helicopter held long enough for the squad to rush the landing zone, piling in, hands grabbing straps, boots slipping on snow. Darnell counted heads. "Mason," he yelled. "Here. Ruiz, get him in." "Where's—" He stopped, swallowed the next word because he didn't know her name. He looked toward the cliff shadows, toward the ridges. She wasn't there. Then from the treeline, she appeared, moving fast, low, rifle slung, snow dusting her shoulders. She reached the helicopter just as it began to lift. A hand shot out from inside and grabbed her wrist, hauling her up. She landed hard on the floor, breath steady despite the sprint. The crew chief slammed the door. Rotors bit the air. The helicopter lifted, banking away from the valley. Through the small window, the snowfield spread out again, deceptively peaceful. From above, it looked like nothing had happened, just white and rock and shadows. Inside, the squad panted, bleeding, shaking. Ruiz lay on the floor with a medic over him, eyes half-lidded. Another wounded man clenched his jaw so hard it trembled. Darnell leaned close to the quiet sniper. "That was you," he said. Not a question. She didn't smile. She didn't deny it. She just nodded once, as if confirming a fact that didn't need celebration. Mason stared at her, face pale. The earlier jokes died in his throat. "How the hell?" She looked at him then, not with triumph, but with something like tired patience. "Snow makes people think they can see everything," she said. "It makes them lazy." The helicopter roared on, leaving the valley behind. Back at the outpost, the debrief room felt too warm. The heater hissed. Steam rose from wet boots. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal. A captain sat at the table with a recorder, jaw tight. "Walk me through it," he said. Darnell did. He described the ambush geometry, the 3 elevations, the disciplined fire. He described the radio silence, the thick jamming that cut them off. He described mortars bracketing and the drone overhead. He kept his voice steady, because that's what leaders did, but inside he still felt the valley's cold grip. The intel lieutenant looked sick now, no longer confident. "They were after the sensor package," he said quietly. "We got confirmation from aerial imagery. While your unit was pinned, a second team moved toward the site. They were trying to rip the data core. And we intercepted a burst transmission, mentions video capture. They wanted footage of you trapped, proof of dominance." Darnell's hands curled into fists. "So we were bait." The lieutenant didn't argue. The captain glanced at the sniper. "Your shots disrupted their timeline," he said. "You took out the jammer, their overwatch, their command element." She sat still, hands folded, expression neutral. "They had a plan," she said. "Plans break when you remove the people who make them possible." The captain studied her. "You understand you changed the outcome of an entire operation." She shrugged slightly. "I did what needed doing." That was the moment Darnell understood her secret. Not a hidden past or a dramatic confession. Her secret was simpler and heavier. She didn't need anyone to believe in her to be effective. She didn't need attention. She didn't need applause. She only needed the work. After the debrief, the squad drifted into the common area. Some sat in silence, staring at hands that still shook. Others joked too loudly, trying to scare away the memory. Mason hovered near her like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. Finally, he said, awkward, "About earlier." "I didn't." She cut him off gently, not unkind. "You did," she said. "It's fine." "It's not," he insisted, cheeks red. "You saved." "Stop," she said, firmer now. "You don't owe me words. You owe Ruiz and the others your focus. Learn what you missed." "That's enough." He swallowed and nodded, chastened. Later, when the outpost quieted and the generator hum became the loudest thing again, she sat alone at a workbench. A single overhead light cast a small circle of warmth. Outside, snow drifted against the walls in slow waves. She laid her rifle on the bench and cleaned it with careful motions. Patch through barrel. Wipe down bolt. Check the worn stock for cracks. She worked like someone tending a promise. Her optics sat beside the rifle, the battery completely dead now. She turned it in her hands, as if considering whether to replace it, then set it aside without complaint. Tools failed. That was part of winter. The work continued anyway. Darnell approached quietly and stopped a few steps away, not wanting to intrude. "You should get some sleep," he said. She didn't look up. Soon, he hesitated, then asked the question that had gnawed at him since the valley. "How did you find those angles? It was open ground. We couldn't see you anywhere." She finally met his eyes. In them he saw no hunger for recognition, only a calm that came from knowing yourself. "I listened," she said, "to the snow, to the wind, to what people ignore because they're in a hurry. There's always an angle if you stop pretending the obvious is the only truth." Darnell nodded slowly. "You didn't tell us your plan." "I didn't need to," she replied. "If I told you, you would have looked for me. And if you looked for me, so would they." He accepted that. It was cold logic, but it was honest. He shifted, uncomfortable with gratitude, because it felt too small compared to what she'd done. "Ruiz made it to surgery," he said. "He's alive." Her shoulders loosened by a fraction. "Good. That's because of you," he added. She returned to cleaning, voice quiet. "It's because you moved when you had the chance." Darnell stood there a moment longer, then said, "They called you a ghost." She paused, then gave the faintest exhale that might have been amusement. "Let them." Outside, dawn threatened again, pale and weak beyond the outpost walls. The valley was miles away, already erasing itself under fresh drift. Tracks would soften, then vanish. Shell craters would fill. Blood would freeze, then disappear under new snow. The fight would leave no permanent mark on the landscape, only on the people who survived it. And somewhere out there, the ridges that had held so much confident enemy fire now held only silence. Proof that certainty could be hunted, and that sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't announce itself. Some victories left no trace except the people who walked Awa.